Hello, hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face, my card making space, and another Halloween card. This one could technically be any occasion. You would just need to switch up the sentiment. And the set I used for the sentiment actually has multiple occasions. We'll get to that. I'm using this large floral. If you're new here, welcome. I will never not love large floral stamps, large floral wafer dies, all the things. Can't go wrong with them, and they work for everything. Everything. So, I'm going to use that. I am going to do some easy distress oxide messy watercolor. I've done a bajillion videos doing this. It is another one of my favorites. Everything's my favorite, but it's another one of my favorite things to do. Splatter, of course, and yeah, very non-traditional colors. I grabbed things at random. It was fun. So, as always, I will have links to all the things I used in the description box below the video. My links are affiliate links. That just means that if you click on one of my links, end up placing an order, I get a little kickback from that at no extra cost to you. It's what helps pay the bills. And then at the end of this video, in the end screen, I will post the link to my 2024 Halloween playlist. There is dozens of videos in there. And like I've been saying, I will keep making right up till Halloween, and you never know, but I make no promises that I'll make like after Halloween. We'll just see what happens. But that's it for the housekeeping. Let's get into making the card. So I'm using the large Grateful Florals stamp set. I used this in a live stream a couple months ago, something. Anyway, it's big. This panel that I'm stamping it onto is A2 size, so 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. This thing will take up an entire A2 card front. Love. So the panel I'm stamping it on is Distress Watercolor cardstock, and figured out where I wanted to stamp the image, and then I'm going to use my anti-static powder tool just to cover that so that I don't get embossing powder anywhere other than the stamped image. And then I am going to stamp this with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. I'm going to stamp it a few times because I didn't even properly ink it up the first time. Stamp it a few times, make sure I get all the detail. And then for the actual embossing, I'm going to use Wow's Clear Matte Dull embossing powder. It's been a while since I've used this. I've shown it in many videos. It is not like your typical embossing powder because when you melt it, it goes glossy when you melt it like a normal embossing powder, but the instant it cools, it goes matte, so you don't have a shiny finish. And it's kind of neither here nor there. It's just something different, you know? There's no like, oh, this makes it better or anything. It's just a neat kind of a look, and I use it often when I want like the raised edges of the heat embossing, but I don't want it to look like it's heat embossed, you know, because you don't have the shininess. So that's what I was going for, because technically you can do this without any heat embossing. However, it makes things a little more difficult. You have to actually be more careful, and you guys know I like to just slap the color on. But also, I heat emboss my images, especially when I'm using anything with like pigments in it, so distress oxides, which is what I'm using, or distress watercolor pencils, just anything that has pigments in it, because when you paint with those, or you know, ink blend, color, etc., they can kind of sit on top of the stamped image, and unless you want to restamp afterwards, which is an option, I don't like doing that because it's happened to me in the past where I will, you know, watercolor or color in an image, spend all the time, and then I go to restamp it to get the detail back and I wreck it. So I'd rather just heat emboss. So anyway, after I'd done my heat embossing, I've got all my distress oxides that I had chosen. I'll have them all listed in the description box with the supplies. But I've got, for the greenery, I'm not using greens. I'm using Hickory Smoke and Black Soot. And for this first layer, this is technically kind of the underpainting, I'm using more water and not as much color because I want it to be a little fainter, not super faint, but I just want it to be a little lighter because I want the actual image is going to be a bit more intense. So I am slapping the color on. I'm using a big watercolor brush. This is one of the Altenew round brushes, the biggest ones, like they call it a size 5, I think. And yeah, just slapping the color on. And the nice thing, because I have it all heat embossed, it's still keeping things a bit contained. Obviously, I'm being messy on purpose, but I don't want it all to turn into just one big old puddle of mud. So the heat embossing, serves dual purposes. It does keep things a little contained for me. And then it also keeps the stamped image still crisp and not covered up with the like oxides and whatnot. And yeah, that's first layer. I purposely, not only am I going outside the lines, I was kind of creating drippy effects, things like that. And then I dried this with my heat tool. Just quick and dirty. We're not doing anything too fancy here. I just needed to be dry so I could just add another layer. So got it dry, used a tissue to kind of soak up any excess little blobs. And then I'm going in with the exact same colors, this time just a little less water so that there's more ink, a little more intense, a little less water. And I'm keeping more just to the images themselves. I'm not going outside the lines for the most part. If I go outside a little bit, not too worried about it. And this again is where having the images heat embossed makes it nice because I don't have to worry about like one area needing to be dry so it doesn't bleed into the next. It's like I always say, the heat embossing is like bumper pads. It keeps me a little more contained. So yeah, I went in for the florals. I used milled lavender, Victorian velvet, tattered rose, spun sugar, and then rusty hinge for the centers. And yeah, kind of went here and there, adding the color, just having fun with it. And this is something you definitely get more comfortable with the more you do it. I remember when, I was watching people watercolor on YouTube way back, when I was just starting to dip my toes into the world of watercolor, and messy watercolor always fascinated me. And I was like, how? You just got to do it. It's just paper, it's paper and ink or paper and watercolors, whatever. Just do it. The more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it. And now it's one of my favorite things to do. The messier, the better. So when I was done, I set it aside to dry. And then for my sentiment, I'm using this circle sayings set. This came out a couple years ago, and it's got several genres. We've got Happy Thanksgiving, Birthday, Christmas, just the sending hugs, Happy Valentine's Day, and then Happy Halloween. So I use the Halloween sentiment, and I have just a scrap of dark gray cardstock that I used my anti-static powder tool on. And then I just stamped the sentiment with that same Nocturne ink, and then used the Wow Clear Matte Dull embossing powder on it. I tried to show it on camera because on darker cardstock you can literally see it. Like again, when it's heating, when you're heating it and melting it, you can just barely noticed it. It's glossy, and then the second it cools down, which is very, very quickly, like almost instant, it goes matte. And it's magical in its own way. Anyway, when I was done heat embossing it, I used my little microfiber cloth to wipe away the excess anti-static powder. And then there is a little coordinating circle die for this set. I'll have links to all the things, but any circle die will obviously work. So I die cut that with a little circle wafer die. And then, of course, I'm going to add splatter. And I'm going to use a couple of distress watercolor pencils. I could have used the inks, like the Oxide inks. I could have just smushed them and splattered them that way. But one, I like to be extra. Two, I love my distress watercolor pencils, specifically for splatter. And again, no rhyme or reason. So I'm using the milled lavender distress watercolor pencil. And I've shown this in different ways. And if I remember, I'll link to my distress watercolor pencil playlist, because I've got a little palette that I use of distress watercolor pencils. I still need to update it because the original palette I made that's in that playlist, that was with the original sets, and now we have all the colors and all the sets, and I'm still working on that palette. It's going to be a while. Anyway, I just got my fan brush, heavily wet, and created kind of little puddles here. And this other one is black soot, obviously. And just made a big old mess. I'll show my hands. With the black soot especially. This one, doesn't matter what distress product it is, black soot is a very strong, very pigmented color. I will say of all the distress products. The black soot, see right there. Great job, Amy. The black soot distress watercolor pencil, easiest to clean up. Some of the other stuff, although with any of them, really, if you wipe your hands fast enough, it comes right off. And then if it stains, well, it comes off with like the amount of times I wash my hands in a day, a little bit of hand sanitizer, things like that. We're good to go. But added all my splatter. I let that dry. And then I tore the one edge. Just cause. I forgot how nicely distress watercolor paper tears. Like it is satisfying. It tears just really, really nicely. It's hard to explain, but I was like, oh, it does things proper. Anyway, this glitter paper is Ideology. It has a specific name, and of course I can't even. My brain is like, no. I will say, like, I have a link to it as of right now. Simon Says still has stock of it. That it has been retired. It's a very interesting, very thin, it's self-adhesive as I showed. I peeled the backing off. I trimmed it down, peeled the backing off. Deco sheets. Ideology Halloween deco sheets. And there's 3 different colors. This is the black one. And it's printed. It's not actual glitter. It is the weirdest stuff. And I hoard all of it, of course. But when I was digging through my Halloween stash, I came across, these panels of it. I was like, ooh, just the color of it will work really nicely with this card. So yeah, I just trimmed it down, peeled off the backing, slapped it down. You can die cut this stuff, play with it, whatever. Like I said, Simon Says does have stock in it because they usually stock up quite heavily on Tim Holtz products. And then they get discontinued, which all the deco sheets I think have been. So it's only available while supplies last. So, anywho, I had adhered it onto my card base. My card base is a top folding A2 note card that I made from black cardstock. And then I adhered my messy watercolor panel right on top with craft tacky glue. And so that torn edge just, gives a peek at that little piece of glitter. That's why I tore the watercolor paper, because the panel wasn't big enough to cover the entire card front. And it just worked. One thing led to another. And then I also trimmed down just a panel of white cardstock to slightly smaller than A2 size. And then I put that back in my MISTI and I inked up the stamp with just a light gray ink. This is Simon's Flannel Positively Saturated ink. And then stamp that. And then I'm going to adhere that panel to the inside of the card. I decided not to add any other sentiments or anything else because it's a large floral. It's good enough. And things like this, I will write right over it. Because I get asked that sometimes when I really kind of cover up the inside of a card. I just write over it. The inside is a bonus. So once I had the inside adhered, I grabbed some pink and white baker's twine from my stash, wrapped that around the card front, and then, as always, use my reverse tweezers to hold everything in place so I can make my little bow, fiddle with it, pull it tight, remove the reverse tweezers, pull it tight, fiddle with it some more till I get it the way I want it, and then trim off the excess. And then for that sentiment, I'm going to pop this up with just some thin foam squares to give it a bit of dimension, but also to kind of even everything out because I've got a little bit of unevenness between the baker's twine and that torn watercolor paper. So I popped the sentiment into place. And then for my little embellishment, these are the Simon Says stamp Positively Dazzling gems. They're the cool tone ones, but they have this sort of pink shade in there, which just works. So I dug through the container and found the pink ones, and I'm just going to adhere those into place with dabs of craft tacky glue. And once I get these adhered, this card is complete. And then as a little bonus, I'm going to use my flashlight. This wasn't intentional, but I had shimmer somewhere. I don't even know where, but not surprising. But possibly in my brush or on the palette. I don't know. I don't know where the shimmer came from, but it was there. And it's hard to show. You can kind of see it there with my flashlight. You can really see it though on the leaves. So they ended up being like the watercoloring ended up being a little bit shimmery, which I'm not mad at. I was like, this is a pleasant little surprise. Again, I have no idea where that came from. But I'm you guys know, I'm a magpie. I'm all for the glitter and the shimmer. So I was like, that's fun. I wish that would happen more often, really. So that was the card. Like I mentioned in the intro and whatnot, I'll have links to all of the things in the description box below the video. So if you just expand that, everything will be there. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me, thumbs upping and commenting. I appreciate it and it helps a ton. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye. Thank you so much to my amazing Patreon supporters. For anyone that might be interested in joining my Patreon community and supporting me, the link to my Patreon is in the description box below the video. For everyone else, as always, thank you all so much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't, I'd love to have you. And here's a couple other videos for you to check out in case you missed them. Bye!